overall, Syria in its first 6 months has been relatively successful. Many people expected there to be a lot of potential security issues, dysfunction politically, as well as challenges from the outside due to the background of those who took over the country. But 6 months later, we see that while there's a ton of challenges ahead, it's definitely one of the better case scenarios that anybody could have envisioned 6 months ago. In these first 6 months, three key successes that we've seen from the government. First, Syrian society has not fallen back into a civil war. This was definitely a possibility considering the fact that the country has been in 14 years of civil war. There are many different factions. The country has many different religious and ethnic groups, as well as outside actors trying to instigate things. We've seen historically also that many countries that have been in civil war have lapsed back into it. We don't have to go too far in cases like Libya or Sudan more recently. Of course, things can change in the future. The way things have relatively stabilized is definitely good. Syria begins to normalize with the world and the United States. The second success that I'd say the Syrian government has accomplished over the past half year has been the ability to have a huge diplomatic campaign, not only to first normalize itself with many skeptical Arab states in the region, to then parlaying that into getting closer relations with many European states, and then most recently with the shocking announcement by President Trump that the U.S. would stop all sanctions on Syria. Without this, while Syria no doubt would continue to trudge along, there would have been challenges economically, as well as the fact that many parts of the country are in poverty. And so this, in the next half year, really changes the game in terms of how things might play out. Finally, the third, success in many ways, the new Syrian government has successfully dealt with a number of security challenges. There has been violence, and nothing's perfect, but in terms of making sure that we haven't seen a large-scale resurgence of the Islamic State, they've also dealt relatively well with former regime members who have been attempting to start an insurgency, but have failed thus far. We've also seen them stopping a lot of smuggling attempts, both related to drugs, Captagon in particular. Finally, they've been interdicting a lot of weapons that the Iranians have been trying to move through the country to get into Lebanon to help out Hezbollah. And so going forward in many respects, this has given more confidence in a number of countries regionally, but also internationally, including in the United States, to the potential capabilities of the new authorities in Damascus, but also potentially working with them. A country like the United States likely has more information and intelligence than the government in Damascus. While there have been many successes, including the three outlined, we've also seen some worrying trends. First amongst them was the massacre that happened on March 6th that killed more than 1,000 Alawites, Sunni Muslims as well. And the government had a role in this in many ways because while it was instigated originally by regime remnants against the security forces of Syria, the way that the government responded was troubling in that they had this open mobilization for people to come and assist them. This was still earlier in the transition. And so you had not only people that were part of the formal military, try and respond a bit more disciplined manner, but you also saw people from factions that they couldn't control, whether it was from the Turkish-backed Syrian National Army, as well as some foreign fighters. But more worrisome was that there was many civilians involved that just decided to pick up arms and start killing Alawites randomly. Definitely created a negative perception of the government, as well as the fact that many minorities locally worry about their future as a consequence of this. Another worrying trend, there continues to be some authoritarian tendencies within the new government. No doubt it's nowhere near as bad as the Assad regime. The former regime was totalitarian. It had a police state. Nowadays, people can freely speak and even talk against the government. And while that's the case, much of the decision-making still is based off of the authorities, and there isn't any known democratic processes at this juncture. As a consequence of this, though, this has created a lack of trust, not only within the government amongst potential people in the population, but also within the population itself. And that could have consequences down the road in the future. And this then kind of leads into one of the third worrying trends was the way that they dealt with the national dialogue as well as the constitutional declaration, where it was very rushed. In terms of the national dialogue, it was only one day. It's hard to believe that you're going to be able to deal with all of the issues and traumas related to 54 years of totalitarian rule in just a morning and afternoon, more or less. And then in terms of the constitutional declaration, there are many worries about all of the powers given to the executive and how that might play out in the future. And so while in a relative sense, it's definitely better than the Assad regime, it's still not at the level of heading towards something that one would describe as a liberal democracy. This has only been 6 months and so much has happened in these 6 months. But if we're looking towards the next 6 months at the end of the first year, one of the key things to look out for is how the US sanctions unwind. Although President Trump made this announcement, now there's this whole bureaucratic process. And it relates to a number of things related to state sponsorship of terrorism, the terrorism designations related to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, as well as some of the leaders in the new Syrian government. You also have the Caesar sanctions, as well as a whole host of other things related to human rights abuses due to the civil war, as well as just the way the former regime operated. There's also the potential that because the country has not had a huge connection to the global economic system, that this infusion of capital could create some level of corruption, especially since if we go back to some of the worrying signs that there isn't this broader trust of people, that a lot of the decision making related to economic issues could be in the hands of a small cohort of people. They didn't even have enough money to pay off their World Bank loans, which was only $14 million. And while that's a lot of money to any individual, for a country, that's really not that much money. And instead, the Saudis and the Qataris worked to help alleviate that debt. The amount of cash that could be potentially going in now in the billions of dollars, if you're looking at some of the memorandum of understanding that have already started to be signed in the last few weeks to a month, suggests that people need to be careful with how this system plays out. The negotiations between the Syrian government and the Syrian Democratic Forces. A second thing that definitely needs to be looked at in the next few months, going into the end of this year as well, is sort of how the integration process with the Syrian Democratic Forces, which is the Kurdish-led force in northeast Syria, as well as their civilian governing apparatus, the Autonomous Administration in north and east Syria, deals with joining the legitimate government in Damascus. There was an agreement in early to mid-March between Ahmed Ashara, the president of Syria, as well as the commander of the SDF, Mazloum Abdi. And they've been working on small deals here and there, sort of pilot programs to try and make sure that everything works out. But some of the hardest challenges will go ahead, especially once we start talking about the new government taking over areas in Hasaka, which is Kurdish majority. You'll have some of the dilemmas that we've seen with the negotiations that the government's already been dealing with. The Druze and Sweda governorate authorities in Damascus don't want there to be a federalist system, but they also understand that they're not going to be able to just dominate these areas either, and therefore need local authorities to work out with these guys as well. These will be the biggest sticking points going forward. And then beyond sort of the dynamics of the SDF and the Autonomous Administration, when we're thinking about governing bodies as well as military apparatuses, but also in terms of the future of the fight against the Islamic State. Of course, the United States and the global coalition, going back to 2014, has been working with the SDF to continue to fight against the Islamic State, as well as originally take them out of the territory that they had previously controlled, and making sure their insurgency doesn't boil up into the point that many people are worried about not only the security of Syria, but regionally as well as internationally again, and how Damascus and SDF sort of deal with this issue and how they integrate their efforts since Damascus has been fighting the Islamic State going back to 2013 themselves, but now working together on this problem set. And then of course you also have the issue of the detention centers where the male ISIS fighters, around 9,000 or so, continue to be housed, as well as the women and children that are in the IDP camps in northeast Syria, which the largest one being in the Al Hol camp, where there's around maybe 35 to 37,000 people remaining, 7,500 to 8,000 of those being third country nationals, meaning not Syrians and not Iraqis. And so there are many challenges related to the security of this as well. The future of transitional justice and other government issues. And then the final aspect of things to look out for from the government itself in the next 6 months is the transitional justice process. Some of the violence that has occurred against former regime people by vigilantes in many ways is a consequence of the new government in Syria not having this process going out, arresting people and prosecuting them, putting them in jail, and things along those lines, and as well as just having sort of a transparent process to get the truth of the realities of a lot of what happened during the Assad regime's rule. And while they've announced this process in recent weeks, we still haven't seen how that might play out, and that will also provide a lot of information on the legitimacy of the process and whether the local population believes in it as well. And hopefully it will tamp down any vigilantism locally too, and therefore creating a whole Syria again in many respects. When we put all of this together, it illustrates that there are both positives and negative trends going on. There's many things to look forward to in the future. It's unsurprising that we see this in a country that dealt with 54 years of totalitarian rule. But it's important that the U.S. continues to engage the new authorities. And now that there's a normal relationship, the U.S. can assist on some of these issues to try and make it better, not only for Syria and Syrian citizens, but also for the region in general, and therefore creating a whole new era in the region in a way we really haven't seen previously.